as the people of Rome are to catch a last glimpse and to be able to pay their last respects to their much beloved bishop.
Thank you, Linda, for that introduction here. And for our television viewers, you can see the square and all the crowds there slowly leaving just before the square was totally full of people, and all there leading into St. Peter's Square. The authorities estimated over 200,000 and a quarter million people gathered in the square, what the square could hold, and the main avenue, Via della Conciliazione, leading into the square. How these celebrations are handled and how they're able to manage these crowds also on this short notice. And for our viewers and listeners also who've been following, coffin that will be taken from St. Peter's Basilica and then exiting part of the Vatican about 4 to 5 kilometers. And we're
that filled the square, so we were all here quite early this morning, 6 o'clock, and all of these pilgrims, all kinds of people, young, a beautiful mass in the end. Trip from
and the main avenue, Via della Conciliazione, leading into the square.
St. Peter's Basilica to St. Mary Major, and such straight St. Peter's Basilica to St. Mary Major, and such a beautiful day.
The straightest itinerary between St. Peter's Basilica and St. Mary Major, but it crosses Sasso Vittorio Emanuele. It will cross the river first and foremost. It will arrive in Piazza Venezia, where the altar of will be
taken from St. Peter's Basilica and then exiting part of the Vatican about 4 to 5 kilometers. And we're
that first at behind him of Roman
the square, so we were all here quite early this morning, 6 o'clock, and all of these pilgrims, all kinds of people, young, a beautiful mass in the end. Trip from St. Peter's Basilica,
the Bishop of Rome's Basilica,
the Diocese of Rome as well, and all
between St. Peter's Basilica and St. Mary Major, but it
are going to leave from this area. And throughout this morning, very moving and poignant moments.
It will arrive in Piazza Venezia, where the altar of will be
during this the liturgy, the Requiem Mass, strong sunshine,
carried in procession for the Colosseum. He's going to pass in
and just very strong or powerful symbolic moments and chants of their own traditions, part of the chants of their own traditions, part of the we can see here.
We saw Jews, we saw Sikhs, we saw sheiks
from Canada.
We saw many heads of state. We saw, of course, the College of Cardinals, all General Congregation's Basilica,
the Diocese of Rome as well, and all are going to leave from this area. And throughout this morning,
congregations during this time of sede vacante.
Years and leaving the Vatican.
Mobile, open, white. It's actually a car that it will drive at about 10 kilometers per hour, so it should take about half an hour to reach St. Mary Major. Perhaps for security reasons, people have been asked not to walk behind it, but they will definitely be lining the streets.
And we've seen some of the images of the entirety of the route that you described earlier, thousands and thousands of people have taken to the streets to say goodbye for the last time. And of course, everyone will be able to visit St. Mary Major and visit Pope Francis's tomb. But this really is, his the day that we are dedicating to him to say goodbye. And Rome, and not only Rome, the faithful have really come out for that.
Very symbolically also, we know that a group of mostly poor people who are assisted by charities will be at St. Mary Major to welcome him to his final resting place. The Pope of the peripheries, the Pope of the people, is very aptly receiving his last embrace from those who he loved the most, the smallest, the weakest, the last in society.
We see the whole entourage there from high above. Now they've just exited Vatican City. They're on the avenue here that leads to a tunnel that then crosses over the Tiber River and will take them into the historic center. People lining the streets there, and we've had plenty of reports of people lining the streets across the city since this morning. So while many were crowded into St. Peter's Square, which had at least around 50,000 until they had to kind of close it off due to the numbers, and then so many hundreds of 150,000 others in the avenues surrounding the area. We have many people as well, in addition, lining the streets or the sidewalks to pay their final respects to Pope Francis and the entourage here, moving at a pace that gives people time to take in the moment as it happens.
And these aerial images that were being shown are really quite impressive. They're beautiful. You can see the car carrying the Pope, and then above what I believe to be the Vatican Gardens, the Pope's Gardens, this beautiful green area which I'm sure he must have wandered through so often. And it's beautiful to have them both together as he makes his way to St. Mary Major. There really are a lot of people out there. You can hear the applause as he makes his way down.
You were saying, Francesca, the Vatican Gardens, which he probably walked. I thought it very beautiful that in the Vrogito, the last act, which they placed in his coffin, there was a summary of his life and of who he was and of his pontificate. And in particular, he was described as a simple and popular pastor in his archdiocese in Argentina, who travelled far and wide by metro and by bus, living in a flat, preparing his own food because he felt like a normal person.
And I think he made everyone he met feel like he was a normal person, and that they were meeting a normal person. And the Pope of the peripheries, that's really what he was. And especially talking about his travelling, and he really travelled the world. His penultimate trip, which Linda, you were on, and he really went to the other side, the forgotten side of the world.
Absolutely. I must say I've had the privilege to be on 2 faraway trips. One was the one you're just mentioning that took us to Indonesia, Timor-Leste, Papua New Guinea, and Singapore, but even the year before to Mongolia to visit the smallest Catholic flock in the world, 1,500 Catholics of the entire Mongolian population. So yes, he travelled into the peripheries of the city, going to visit prisoners, going to visit elderly people, poor people, always welcoming refugees, but he'd also travel across the world to the remotest and furthest away places from the Vatican, obviously, that is. And people always came out in floods to welcome him. I'll never forget landing in Timor-Leste, which is a tiny and new country, and the entire the half of the entire population, 750,000 people, came to the mass. The floods of people just there to welcome him. Very moving.
And they're countries that are so far off the grid, we barely even hear of them. And another gesture that was one of his final gestures was he visited the prison. He went to Regina Coeli, I believe, which is a prison in the Trastevere area of Rome, not too far from the Vatican. And it's a symbolic gesture that he does every year at Easter, and of course with him having been unwell, we weren't sure whether he would have done, and the fact that he did meant so much to prisoners worldwide, but all marginalized people. And I think the Pope himself said, you know, it could have been me. It could have been anyone in your position, and that awareness that he had and that he transmitted to the people who were suffering the most, I think is one of the greatest legacies that...
As you've mentioned, the around 40 of them will be there. There might be more or less, but some of them have Marta and meet with them just to...
He's passing here in front of some very...
More of here. And
yes, it's remarkable. Also, it's the first papal funeral, can we say, with this
refugees and
I must say, in these days in which tributes have been pouring in again...
Marta and meet with them just to...
He's passing here in front of some very...
More of here, and
yes, it's remarkable. Hopefully that voice will be will continue to resonate.
Well, right until the very end, his final appearance. Right until the very end, his final appearance on Easter Sunday. He dedicated his words, his Urbi et Orbi blessing, which someone else read for him, but he dedicated it to the people suffering war, and he has...
They wave there, and again, it's particularly poignant and touches migrants and refugees and
I must say, in these days in which tributes have been pouring in again and again, I've been hearing he was a voice for those who had no voice. So hopefully that voice will be will continue to resonate. Well, right so often for him at the general audience, which is always an occasion for him to reiterate this appeal. And Francisca, you wrote that lovely farewell that we published on the web.